Good evening. Welcome to the Policy Committee meeting, November 16th, 2021. I'll call the meeting to order. Julie, would you take roll?
Sure. Anthony Zenobia.
Here.
Bill Baumgart.
Here.
Patrick McCaffrey.
Here.
Kelly Cassidy.
Here.
And Greg Dietz is excused this evening. Thank you. This evening, we will move directly into the opportunity for citizens to speak. This is the point where we allow that. Each individual, this varies depending on how many people are here. If we have less than 6, we go beyond the 3 minutes for a minute or two if you need to. So I'm just explaining that now. Normally it's 3 minutes. You will be warned in advance or told in advance of when your time is up. Julie, is that going to be running on this new magic clock we've got, or
No.
you're going to? Huh? Oh, you want that? Wow.
Yeah, just let me know if you want the 5 or the 3.
Well, we're going to go with the 5-minute maximum, and so we will advise you at the. She or he will advise you at the 3-minute mark, right? Okay. We expect the speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, be respectful of their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board or committee meetings. We also ask the audience and expect the audience to be respectful of the other speakers and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions are to be between the board and the audience, and that the area behind the speaker and the podium will be clear during the public comments. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, if you have a cell phone with you, please silence your cell phone. Okay, our first speaker will be Paul Reese, and that'll be followed by Sam D'Amico. Paul?
That's funny, I wasn't the first one. Okay, last Wednesday I didn't have a time to read this because I only had 2 minutes, so I'm going to read this tonight. Number of students failing at least one class in 2019 at Waukesha North was 54. And in 2020, that number rose to 292, an increase of 440.7%. In 2019, South had a total of 135 students failing at least one class or more. And in 2020, that number rose to 387 for an increase of 186.7%. In 2019, West had a total of 74 students failing at least one class or more. And in 2020, that number rose to 268, for an increase of 262.2%. Again, I do not consider 2019 to be some kind of high watermark, or that it should be something just to settle for. One other thing I want to say, at least I know my arguments, my theological arguments, the difference between a straw man and a red herring. And not that I made a red herring argument, but I know the difference between the two. Last Wednesday, there was a problem I have with what the school board did and was saying, and that is the fact that it started to weigh hurt. Who hurt more? That this person hurts more than that person. I understand that you hurt more than I did, and this and that. Nobody hurts more than anyone else. We all hurt the same. People have different breaking points, but the hurt's all the same. To whoever suffers it, it's the same. And this is a government body, and it has no business going there. And that rubbed me wrong, because there's just no way to judge who has more hurt. Who has more hurt, the kids here or the kid the past spring who was raped who came here? Where do we draw the line? Should we make a policy and list the number of hurt that people have? Whose hurt is more? Whose hurt should we consider before whose else's? Where's that line? It doesn't exist. It hurts the same. It's just the breaking points are different. Things build character. There's sometimes in life hurt builds character. You get through things. You learn things in life. I've gone through things. I was picked on one time. We were driving on the bus, and some kids, the kids I hung out with, were giving this old lady a hard time, calling her every name in the book. And I stood up for her. I said, dude, that's like your grandma, you know. You're going to be there somewhere. That turned to me. They turned that to me and said, you want this, you want that, and that went on for years. I mean, for the rest of that year, it went on. And it was so much that I ran into that kid 20 years later in the Wisconsin Dells, and he brought that up to me. He said, remember when you did that? You know, I really felt bad. You were right. But the rest of the story is, a couple of years later, I went to Central, and then my parents moved, and I went to North High School. Well, very few people went from Central to North. And there was a girl who I was really close with, good friends with. And when we went to North, she started getting picked on. And I didn't step up for her. And I wasn't the person I should have been. And I had to learn that Paul fell short because of something that I had felt earlier on. I was, got picked on then. And so it built that character. Never again will I do that. Never again will I fall short with a friend of mine, who I call a friend. That is done. It built that character so much in me that I will never do that. I will never fail someone like that. But as far as this government body goes, there is no way that it should weigh whose hurt is more. And when it comes to being bullying, what is bullying? What is the definition of it? One thing, and I felt back, is I agree with Joe Cuomo completely on this. We have gone through this before. I've been here a long time coming here. These policies are well in place and well established, and this board and the administration takes care of this and knows what it's doing when it comes to these things, because there's always two sides to every story. There's theirs, mine, and somewhere in between the two lies the truth, and that's part of growing up too. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Sam D'Amico, followed by Allison Kalinsky.
Good evening. Tonight I'd like to speak on what has happened the past week on signage. One, I'd like to thank the 8 members of the board that chose to add to the conversation and build a consensus with the board that bullying is an issue that we need to solve fast. I hope everyone understands the urgency of this problem, and I hope that we aren't just going to use the discussion last week and the discussion tonight as a reason to keep avoiding making any progress on this issue. Now that the discussion has happened, more needs to be done, not less. The reason this issue is so important is because we can keep saying that we should report things to teachers and administrators. Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't amount to anything. I've seen kids get in more trouble for standing up in the lunchroom without raising their hand than did a white student who told a Hispanic student to go back to your own country. I've seen kids get in more trouble for using profane but not derogatory language than did students who verbally harassed LGBTQ students. Those are regrettably everyday occurrences. And I'd just like to say, the students and parents and teachers that I have spoken to say that this problem is getting worse. So whether statistically the problem of bullying is getting worse, we know that far too many incidents aren't being reported. I believe an idea posed by numerous school board members that we should have one sign for the entire school, entire district, is a good one. I've been supporting that idea since early October. 2 parents, 4 students, and I had a meeting with Dr. Siebert a few months ago that I organized, and it was brought up then. I do support this as some common ground. I like the idea brought forth by students, staff members, and parents that we should have a zero-tolerance policy. It's a good one, because according to what the superintendent said in that meeting, we don't have one now. This was brought up because a couple of members said that we do have a zero-tolerance policy, yet in the meeting the superintendent seems to disagree, which I agree with that disagreement. I think that if you're on the Board of Education, it's important to understand the difference between having a policy that says this will not be tolerated and an official zero-tolerance policy. There is a difference. I'd also like to add that I write most of my comments to the Board of Education, as I do the majority of emails that I send out at school, either before school starts, during study hall, during lunch, or during work time after all of my work is completed. This does not get in the way of my instruction. So respectfully, Dr. Piasek, please do not instruct me on when I can and cannot email you. I'd like to thank every member here. You all do a lot of work, and while people on both sides can give everyone a hard time, I do hope that this is an issue that can be solved soon, hopefully with unanimous support, because I think a consensus was built last weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Allison Kalinsky, is that correct?
Yeah, Allison Kalinsky.
And followed by Sarah Harrison.
I've spoken at meetings before about how the removal of safe space signs, pride flags, and anti-racism signs has negatively affected the safety of students, but the removal of these signs is currently endangering students more than ever. A parent of a student at West High School is organizing adults to contact parents and guardians of students who are speaking at school board meetings and students who are members of the LGBTQ+ community. The parent is saying that this was organized in order for students to be able to get the support and counseling that they need, since they are no longer able to know that it is a safe space at school due to the lack of welcoming signs. But in reality, this is only outing students who are LGBTQ+ and putting these students in an unsafe and potentially life-threatening environment. I understand wanting to help students, but this is not the way to do this. This idea is clearly poorly thought through and immature. Many students have told me about how if their families found out that they were members or supporters of the LGBTQ+ community, that they would be kicked out, disowned, or even worse. Several of my friends and students I do not even know have told me that their parents have been called or messaged by the adult organizing this. Not only are they contacting the parents of the students, but also family, friends, and other adults. This is outing students to even more people and endangering them even more. This is going far past the issue of bullying. It is now more of an issue of students being harassed by their peers in school and now by grown adults outside of school. Not having school safe space signs is incredibly important, especially now that the homes of these children are becoming even more dangerous. Currently, not having a decision on the sign policy is opening up an opportunity for students' lives and health to be at risk. Please start putting the wellness of students first and put an end to this endangerment of students by allowing up safe space signs. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Sarah Harrison, followed by Dave Richmond.
Good evening. I'm here to speak to you about the signage removal policy. Dr. Piasek, I want to thank you for stating the following at the November school board meeting. You stated it doesn't even compare when some of us talk about that we were bullied in school. I know that it's different. This is bigger than everybody's been bullied, so just suck it up. I appreciate those words. I also thank you for calling for an approval process for signs that are to be posted in the classroom. And I agree that signs can make individuals feel welcome, but they don't solve the larger bullying problem. And I 100% agree that the bullying issue needs to be addressed as well. This board does not need to face the task of determining who is more hurt or more damaged. The federal government has already defined federally protected classes based on shared characteristics. All that this board and this district need to do is to protect against discrimination and harassment based on these classes. These classes include race, color, religion or creed, national origin or ancestry, sex including gender, pregnancy, sexual orientation, and gender identity, age, physical or mental disability, and veteran status. There are some great resources out there that talk about how to support students who are facing bullying. The educator resource page on glstn.com provides education for policymakers and practitioners, particularly at the district and state levels, and they have concrete recommendations related to creating a safe and affirming learning environment that uphold the dignity of all students. Their number one recommendation is to show support by displaying a safe space sticker or sign in your classroom. They also recommend that schools should set and reinforce a vision and mission statement that is welcoming and inclusive of LGBTQ students, assess, strengthen, and monitor school climate on a regular and ongoing basis, adopt and implement clear, consistent, and comprehensive non-discrimination policies that protect and affirm students' sexual orientation, gender identity, and/or gender expression, among other characteristics such as race, religion, and so forth, and prohibit discrimination against students, families, and educators on those bases. They recommend that policymakers ensure that anti-bullying and harassment policies enumerate and specifically include protections for LGBTQ students, ensure that discipline policies rely on positive and restorative approaches and do not disproportionately target LGBTQ youth, students of color, English language learners, or students with disabilities. Ensure that district and school policies are designed and implemented to support transgender and gender nonconforming students who face even more hostile school environments than the other students in the LGBTQ community. Ensure that professional development and educator resources include a focus on creating inclusive learning environments in which all students, including LGBTQ students, feel safe and welcome, and establish a welcoming and affirming environment for LGBTQ students and their allies. I'm so glad to hear the interest in helping to solve this issue of bullying, and I encourage you to visit this resource for suggestions on how to do so.
Thank you, Sarah. Dave?
Not sure I'm going to be able to take up all the time, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. Remember always that the first and greatest concern must be for the educational welfare of the students attending the public schools. Everyone in this room should have that as first and foremost as you walk into this room, as you're doing work for the school board, whether you're on the school board or in the administration. And if that isn't your main focus, please make sure that it is, or pass it on to someone else that may feel that is the number one concern. I took a step back last week. I've spoken at a few meetings on sign issues as well as the lunch decision. And took a step back, tried to take my emotion out of it and listen. And just sit back and listen. Took a few notes and then reviewed the meeting again. A couple things that jumped out at me is the bullying message I think was received, but I'm not sure if it was received. I think it needs to be acted upon in a manner, not just giving lip service, but to actually work on it and have conversations in committee meetings, or if it needs to be brought up in new business, to put a policy forward, whether it be a zero tolerance. Because the sign policy, sign directive, whatever we'd like to phrase it as, has not brought the district together. Instead, it has acted more divisive than anything I have seen. Oh, wait, I forgot about the lunch decision that was made. That was actually national news. We're only making local and regional news now with the sign directive. It's clearly listed. I don't have enough time here to go through all the different policies and direction of what the board and the administration's responsibilities are. But to call a policy a directive so they can go under a different category doesn't really fit. The board's job is to pass policy. The administration's job is to implement and find the best ways to solve the problem. The directive came down during the lunch issues. Then it was raised that we're going to listen to individuals. And I appreciate that is being done. That's kind of that's not following the correct direction. All of this should have been done in the first quarter of this year. Not pass the directive and then backtrack and say, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. It's not really the best way to go about doing that. When you pass a sign directive, it does affect other individuals outside of what you think it may affect. And you have to take a look at the bigger picture. And this is to the
2 minutes.
That's a great voice, by the way. Can take a look at this includes the board as well as the administration by taking a look at those. A couple other things. This I've written down a few times. Winston Churchill, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. God, I hope forbid we have to go through anything that we had to go through in August, based on some poor decision-making practice that was made in June, in a conversation where the guard was down because it was the end of the school year. And without thinking 3 steps ahead, decisions were made in June. The decision to not take the lunch menu was passed, and then it had to be raised to their attention that, you know what, if you're going to make that broad and safe and powerful statement, you better have something backed up. And the fact is, you didn't have anything backed up. You came, you said, oh, well, we'll just go back to what it used to be. If the goal of the district is to be average, mediocre, and go back to what we used to, go find something else to do, because that isn't acceptable anymore. We've all just come out of COVID. It needs to be recognized that things need to be done differently. You need to work together as a board. You need to work together in doing what your jobs are assigned.
30 seconds.
In terms of if you are asked to present to the board, to come in with all those facts and not give half stories or part stories, but come in with data and say, these are the reports we referenced. These are the items we're doing. To the administration, please know that diversity is very important to this district, and please take the proper steps and be accountable to the school district of Waukesha and the citizens so that we can be correct. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, thank you to everybody out there presenting their comments. We will now move into some action items. The first of which is the minute approval from our October Policy Committee meeting, seeking a motion for approval of those minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Patrick. Seconded by Anthony. Discussions on the minutes.
I'm going to abstain because
I'm sorry.
I'm going to abstain.
I understand. Okay, that's right. I forgot about that. Okay, then we will, all in favor of the minutes, please say aye. Aye. And if no one knows, you're going to abstain. You got it, okay, Julie. I was going to say you got it for Kelly. Okay, thank you. We now do have I don't want to call it an abundance because we've thinned it down from what it almost was going to be, but we do have a number of policies to deal with, some of which we've been through before and we're bringing back for specific reasons. And then we'll have some new ones besides that. So, the first policy that we will be visiting was policy 0100, bylaw on definitions. This was designed to just put a whole bunch of definitions and clarify them. Joe, do you have something specific that we were dealing with?
Yeah, there was a number of them, and I'll just go through them item by item. The definition of board was clarified that allows the term board or district to be used interchangeably depending on the context of the policy. District, again, that reflects the same thing as the board, that board and district may be used interchangeably, again, depending on the context of the policy. Under personal communication devices, telephone paging devices, beepers, pagers, has been eliminated, just those are no longer used. When we go forward to the third page of the policy, relative now includes domestic partner, stepchild, or member of the immediate household to determine relative, or to help define relative. School nurse, there was a question on school nurses. They are a nurse. They are an RN, a CNA, or a, I'm forgetting the other term, CNA or LPN does not fit the definition of school nurse.
It's just the RNs.
Just the RNs. And that has to deal with implementing a doctor's order and then delegating nursing care in the system to a health room assistant. So that's why we have the RN in place. And then school official, there was a question on it, does this really include volunteers? Yes, our volunteers are screened. There's a background check done, and there's an application for volunteers in the district. So the school official does also encompass a volunteer. Again, it's going to depend on policy. If you remember many of our policies, we have a policy on school visitors that sits alone as a school visitor policy. We have policies, though, that cover administration, the 1,000 series, professional staff, the 3,000 series, and support staff, the 4,000 series. So volunteers does fit outside of what was professional, administrative, or support staff. Support staff does include, even though it's a requirement to hold a special education program license issued by the DPI or grant a valid or current DPI license or permit. So the special ed paraprofessional definition was clarified a little bit to include the licensing requirements. And then that was the definition discussion. I know there was one other question that Dr. Piasek had from a month or so ago, and I'm happy to entertain that.
It
Yes.
was just maybe a redundant one. The definition of vice president says that it's the vice president. So the CFO, the president are listed as CEO. I'm sorry, the treasurer is listed as CFO, the president is listed as CEO of the board, vice president. I know there's a whole bylaw that applies to this role, so it was just a clarification of whether we were okay with the term actually being the definition. It's a detail.
Okay. We had in our notes about the words of will, must, and shall. Was there a question?
Yeah, there was also a question of will, must, and shall. And so for purposes of our policy, we focus on two words in particular, may, which allows for discretion of implementation or how it's going to be implemented. Shall is a must. There is other language in our policy, though, that is taken generally from statute, state statute or law, where the terms, you'll see will or must be handed down. And so if it's the committee's, comfort, we can change anything that is must or will to shall as we go through the policies as a technical revision. But the two terms that we really want to focus on are may, which allows for discretion, and shall, which means you will do it. That's
Yeah.
what's in the policy.
And really, those are the only two things that we need to specify, to use.
Yep.
Either you can do it or you will do it, or
Right.
how we want to use those words. Good, we're clear on that then?
And it doesn't take a vote. I mean, not have had discussion, and I can just ask Julie to put a Post-it by her computer, and we can make that technical correction as other policies come up.
Okay, yeah. Relative to this policy then, are we okay with it? The members here? Remind me, Julie, are we at the point, is this one of the ones we need approval, we want to seek approval of now? Yes, it is. Okay, we've had an array of things lately, so, okay. Is there a motion for accepting 0100 as described?
May I
Kelly,
just make
yes?
one other comment? One of the other issues that I had raised was the definition of voting, which again, it's not a critical issue in this policy, but there's a lot of description of voting that almost seems like it is policy by itself in terms of having to be present and proxy voting and a lot of that. So I'm wondering if that exists someplace else. And this, the definition of voting is simply, the act of taking either the roll call or the verbal vote.
It does exist if you give me a moment, I will get to our policies. Under the bylaws,
And while you're looking, I'll just emphasize my reason for maybe wanting to remove this from this policy is so we don't have conflicting policy statements in different policies.
You mean the very last page where it's one of the definition items?
Voting is actually, has some practical policy statements in it.
Yeah, so the voting is covered under bylaws 0167.1, and it does give a definition. What you see here is I I guess, a summary of what that policy is. One of the features of having things in the definition is, among the other policies, if it talks about a board vote or the process of voting in any way, shape, or form, just for a useful thing, if people wanted to go back to the definition, instead of looking at bylaw 0167.1, they could refer to the definition if they had a question on it, or actually search the policy up.
Okay. Can I just make a recommendation then that perhaps we reference the bylaw 0167.1?
Thank you, I was
So
thinking,
that if somebody searches for it, if there's changes made to that policy, that we can change them here.
we can make, that's
That's
good.
just
I was going to ask the same question, so we can put that in there?
Yep, absolutely.
So I guess then we are really seeking the policy as we just adjusted it. So, do I have a motion for accepting this policy as we've just adjusted it relative to voting?
I would move to approve policy 0100 as discussed.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Patrick. Any other discussion on this one? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 4-0. Julie? Thank you. Policy 0144.3, conflict of interest. This one we had some question relative to what is that value? And Joe, you were going to do some research on that.
Yeah,
I
so
see it in here, yeah.
we did. There was some question again, there was some language, so substantial value and value is used. And so we attached Wisconsin State Statute 19.59, which is cited as part of this policy.
Right.
That covers conflicts of interest in the state of Wisconsin. And so that, that's where you see the two terms used. If you go to 1959, under subsection A there, it talks about no public official may use his or her position to obtain financial gain or anything of substantial value. And then it goes on to use value in similar statements in this policy. So again, some of it is statutory language that talks about value and substantial value, and because the policy is aligned to the statute, that's why it is written as such. There wasn't a dollar amount in reference or anything like that. There is the legal amount that would, trigger, I believe it's a felony, if it's by having a value, board members shall also perform their duties in a manner that does not violate criminal conflict of interest laws in amounts that exceed $15,000. So that would be, I guess, the threshold that we'd be looking at.
It's a big one.
Yep.
Julie, I keep
Maybe
saying,
offer some perspective. I think this ambiguity exists in multiple different industries. I don't think it's just, simply what we're addressing here. Just some context from my experience within the healthcare industry, typically the threshold that's used is 5,000. And this is talking about surgeons, cardiologists, compensated individuals. So, and I know this because it's always a point of contention that it seems like a low amount for people who make a pretty high income. But I would say that 15,000 in the context of, typical salary grades within district, especially related to, board members, it seems like a big number, 15,000.
are you suggesting we change it?
I would like it to be 5. I would be more comfortable with 5, but I don't, again, there's not a statute. I'm just kind of, referencing what I know to be the standard in my experience, unrelated experience.
Other thoughts? Anthony?
Yes, I guess my thought would be, what if any examples are there of this occurring? It does seem high to me, again, given salaries and things of people that work in the districts. How often does this occur? Does it even approach
So this would be as it
Level?
pertains to the school board members, and the $15,000 is the criminal level for conflict of interest. So in Waukesha, I don't necessarily know that it has an immediate application, but say, for instance, the district were to go to referendum in the future. And as part of that referendum project, we had members of our board who were, somehow connected to some sort of construction type industry, be it the actual construction company or an architectural firm or a project management type firm, somebody like owner's representative or something like that. And they were using their influence on the board to leverage the district to take a certain contract with someone or a company, then you'd be running into what that threshold is. $5,000, it would be an option that the district could take. $15,000 is the criminal level, which is why it's in the policy. But I think that would be a practical example. In some other school districts, like in a smaller community, you may have a school board member who owns a cleaning company, and the district is in the process of going to bid for cleaning services, and you could run into the conflict of interest if that board member was in the bidding process for it. So they would not be able to do the competitive bidding. And if they did, that $15,000 could be perceived as the conflict of interest and criminal. So those are some things that in Waukesha, I don't know if it applies. It could apply though, just given, the scopes of work that we do and, kind of the background of some board members that we've had in the past, that all could play out for us.
You just hate to see, people's behavior influenced by trying to stay under a certain threshold, right? So if it's, well, I can do $14,000 worth of business with you, but not 15, and I think 5 is, while it's stricter and it's prohibitive, there's no right number. If somebody's financially influenced to do the wrong thing, that's not okay. My understanding too, though, is that, as this policy is written, there are management plans, right? So you can someone could disclose a conflict and accuse themselves from the circumstances. So this is really more applying to undisclosed conflicts that would have some penalties associated with them.
These would be the shady things that.
Yeah.
Yes. And we've had people very honestly not participate in some voting, for instance, because of, they know somebody or their relative that works here or things. So we've tried to be pretty honest about this, I think. And I can't remember where we had an issue. Where we had do you remember one?
I think the issue was a land sale.
The land sale?
A land sale. I believe we bought land from an employee at one time.
Really? I don't remember that. Not good.
There was a conflict of interest. It wasn't a board member though, so.
Oh, it was not? Okay, that's maybe why I don't remember
So
it.
there was, I think that's where a lot of that bubbled up.
Okay, maybe why this is written. Go ahead, Anthony.
Just a further question. In the policy, at the beginning where we're talking about something of any value, in some of the other, I know this pertains to the board, but in some of the other policies that are at the back end of our packet here that have to do with administration and staff, there's a number defined of $25. And I guess my initial problem with this last time was, technically a board member could get in trouble for accepting a T-shirt just because they didn't want to be rude and turn it down, you know what I mean? So I guess, the first point I would make is, here we're saying you can't have anything of any value, yet you could technically be the beneficiary of some type of contract down the road that would be substantially higher, right? It seems like a little bit of a disconnect to me, but
Yeah.
the $25 figure is addressed elsewhere in these policies. The same statutes are on there. I guess my first question would be, why not add that here so that there's no, Someone getting, a board member getting in trouble over something that maybe was not something that was going to affect their vote, or I guess I don't see why it would apply to the board and not, or would apply to staff and not necessarily the board.
The $25 thing is just, I don't necessarily know if it's defined in the IRS, but it's kind of standard matter of practice as being of low value if it's $25 or less. And that allows, people to get a T-shirt, a cup, something like that from people, as a result of whatever. It's one of those low value things, if you were to ever get a holiday basket from someone or whatever it is, it sets that up bar for a level of gift giving in a dollar amount that I think they believe would not influence, a vote. I think in the conflict of interest thing, though, you're really talking about entering into a contract with the organization and getting into that bidding process where there could be a level of influence, and I think that's the separation. I don't know, and I'd have to go through the bylaws to talk about what level of gifts the board could take. It is spelled out for the employees as to what type of gifts we could get. I don't know where in policy. I'd have to take a minute to look to see if that's spelled out in a bylaw for the board or not. Again, I think one is like what you're trying to gain for financial benefit versus getting the STEM Saratoga T-shirt for,
Right.
Showing up at the robotics day or whatever it might be. So I can definitely look into that and give you guys that on an update on Friday, and we can certainly come back and revisit this
Let's do that.
appropriate. Yep.
Yeah, there's some interesting discussion going on here, and I think to Anthony's point, we should try and make it as comfortable to people as possible so that they don't get nervous about something that's not worth getting nervous about. No. So let's just try to make it as clear as we can. So we'll carry this one.
We can, yep.
Okay, thank you. Policy 2430, district-sponsored clubs and activities. This was brought in previously. We had some questions we wanted to iron out, and I apologize, I don't remember exactly what they were. I think
Dr. Piasek last month had some good questions on this, and I just asked that we hold it over until
Okay, that's
the
what.
present to ask us, or have that discussion here.
Thank you. There were some additions, and I just wanted to get some clarification, and some of this is just based on previous experience with clubs associated with the district, and whether those clubs are considered completely community activities or district-sponsored events. There was an addition of the word competitive, and I'm going to pull up the document here, so I have it in front of me. And I wanted to get some clarification because where competitive athletics was brought up, I'm thinking of clubs like ski club, for example, which might be more of a casual activity, not a competitive sport, not like a youth basketball or soccer program. Was there a reason that competitive was added?
We've had some sports that were in development. Was lacrosse the most recent one?
Yes.
Yeah, where they were club status sports. They weren't WIAA sanctioned. We hadn't gone through that process. We were kind of in an interest level, how many kids are going to be up. And then they did move at some point to move lacrosse as a WIAA sponsored sport. So when we do get into that club, that competitive club, the kids were participating in competitions. There were officials at the games. There was, a lower level of support from the district from what the WIAA sport contribution was, but that was one recent example.
Thank you for that. And so how do we separate like an organized club from another club? And, who gets privileges with respect to school branding and school name and all that, as opposed to, being treated like a community group?
That's a really good question. I'd have to ask our athletic directors, I think, how that goes back and forth between, like, for instance, the youth basketball attached to North High School or West High School, youth football attached to one school.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly work with them to get a more clear understanding of the process, and then how that interacts with what is the school-sponsored. And the school-sponsored ones are those, generally speaking, at the high school level, it's to some degree at the middle school level and elementary, where there is an advisor, there's an approval process for the club, and it meets the definition or the bullet points for the purposes of this policy. District-sponsored activities are typically those activities which, and then go through items A.
Well, I'm not clear on that. I see the district-sponsored as a very strong definition of those.
Yep.
Wouldn't the ones we're talking about be outside of that? Any of those that are not district-sponsored would fall into the rest of them?
Yeah, there's non-district sponsored events, and that's spelled out at the bottom of page 1 of 2.
Right.
But I think Dr. Piasek's question goes more for how does the South Youth Football Program get to use the name South? And how does the West Youth Football Program get to use the West name, like the branding component of it and the attachment?
Okay, the question is not which is which. The question is some of those.
Well, I mean, I do think, just from a parent experience, there is some confusion about what's a sponsored event and what, or a sponsored activity and what's not. There's a specific call-out, page 2 in the first edit, that says non-district sponsored organizations may not use the logo or the mascot or name associating the activity with the district. And so I think that there's some clarification needed on this policy about is a youth athletics program that is of interest to a high school athletic director, somehow given, the privileges to use the name, and speaking from a parent's perspective, the youth clubs are treated like community groups. So I just think that there's some ambiguity in there about, the way I read this would say that the youth athletics clubs shouldn't be using high school names, and I don't think that's what we want.
Shouldn't be connecting with the high school.
Yeah, they're called like the junior black shirts.
And we do have policy that talks about the use of our logo. I don't necessarily know how that would fall within the scope of the name, the mascot name. What I'll do is talk to the athletic directors and see, they may already have a process that they've got listed in place as to how to differentiate the two, but we'll get more information for the December meeting.
So we'll carry that forward also.
Yep.
Just another.
Oh, I'm sorry, Anthony.
Just another quick question on that. If, generally, how does a club get to become district sponsored? Like, say there's something that is not currently here. A student says, hey, I want to start a, knife throwing club. What is the, maybe that wouldn't be approved. What is that process?
So the group of students would approach an adult in the building to see if there was an advisor. We've seen that happen, through a variety of clubs. They then would go through and work with the school administration to see if it's an approved club that would fall under our Appendix B or C funding contract and everything like that. And then they would go through the approval process for the club. They would have to show membership for a period of time. I'd have to look this up because we do have a district-sponsored, we do have a piece either in policy or guideline on it. And then that club then would move forward and be part of the school offering, in future years. So we do get requests, not frequently, but not infrequently, somewhere, kind of in the middle for new ideas for kids. And if there's interest in the kids and interest in the staff, there's a process to say yes or no to it.
Is there an amount of students that have to, is it 5 or is it just whatever?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
I'm just curious. Okay.
But I can have that information for you as well.
Kelly?
Thank you.
Oh, excuse me. Kelly?
And thank you. If I could just add maybe one final comment. So the addition of the word competitive and athletics, to me, changes just the fundamental application of the policy. And I think if we, that's kind of what I was getting at. And those were added. So before it read such activities along with extracurricular activities, et cetera. So I just didn't know if it was the intent to have this be all-inclusive with youth competitive extracurriculars, or if there was, some other reason of convenience for pulling that in, or if we need to have some kind of separate policy that applies to that.
Okay.
Yep. We'll look into that for next month.
Turn the page. Policy 9270, home-based, private, and tribal schooling. And this also had a question on the sanctioned versus non-sanctioned. I had that noted on here.
So in this policy, what we did, Mr. McCaffrey had some questions on the, I'm trying to find the exact line in here. That was in question last month. I'm sorry, middle of the page, just above the bold, home-based private. The board shall not allow any student who is educated in a private or tribal school to participate in any of the district's non-WIAA sanctioned athletic or extracurricular programs. The reason why it says non-WIAA is there would be the option for students who are in tribal school or in home school to join the debate club at one of our high schools. And when this policy was first drafted, we wanted to hold to whatever statutorily we were required to do. And there's guidance, and I included the interscholastic policy for your reference here that talks about what homeschool participation would be on the district's athletic teams, because that then is WIAA sanctioned. But this is truly a statement around what is non-WIAA sanctioned in the homeschool policy. There is latitude for homeschool kids to participate in athletics under the WIAA rules.
Yeah, and I guess the question I had was actually the private school. The board shall not allow any student who's being educated at a private school to participate in any of the district's and my question was, can they play football then? Because that would be a WIAA sanctioned athletic or extracurricular.
Correct, but based off the WIAA rules, they would not be allowed to play football. This is really talking not about WIAA activities. It is
Right.
about district-sponsored high school level clubs or whatever it might be.
So I wonder if we should rephrase that. It's kind of clunky.
Sure.
You know, I mean, if somebody read that and didn't read the WIA stuff, they think they could sign their kids up for football. You know, I mean, I would reword it somehow because it just seems.
You're talking about that same sentence, the board
Yeah,
shall
same-
not allow?
And I appreciate Dr. Cook putting in the WIA rules because those are hard enough to read anyway, but no one reads them because they're hard to read.
So in any of the
So,
districts.
yeah, I mean, I would just make it clear that if you're at
So perhaps if we said,
CMH, you're not playing football at South.
sure, perhaps if we said
know, I mean-
in any of the districts,
Sounds like you could.
But it says non-WIA. How could you?
so if we strike,
Because, okay.
I was just going to say, if we strike non-WIA,
Yes.
if we just say in any of the districts, strike non-WIA sanctioned athletic, so if we strike non-WIA, we just say districts athletic or extracurricular programs.
You know,
Board policy, the number is 2431, governs WIAA
right.
and district-sponsored.
Okay, so then
I mean,
the non comes out of it and
yeah.
they already can't go to the sanctioned ones, right?
Right.
So,
According to a different policy.
yeah.
If you didn't read.
That's what he's writing down though. I think you're adding,
I just put language in there that says board policy 2431 governs athletics and district activities. So we would be saying you can't do it, and then here is the area where those participations
Okay.
discussed.
Perfect.
so if we change that, do we want to act on it tonight?
I have no problem acting on it this evening. I have no problem acting on it this evening.
Okay. Okay, Kelly?
Thank you. I had the same question, and that resolves it. There was one other statement that I felt was confusing, and that was actually the second full sentence in the document. The student must meet the criteria for admission to the high school established for private school or tribal school students. Is that just kind of redundant with they're being educated at a private school or a tribal school? Because I assume if they're being educated at a private or tribal school,
made it
that
in.
they've met the requirements?
Would agree.
I just didn't understand the purpose of the statement.
The student must meet the criteria for admission to the high school. Established, yeah.
Is it our high school?
It would be
Their
our,
high school?
it would be our high school, for the students attending.
Oh.
So, if we
should
want to do.
clarify that.
Yep. Students must meet the criteria for admission to.
I would say maybe the district's criteria for admission to
That doesn't read that way, Joe.
school. The high school where the courses will be taken.
The student must meet criteria for admission to the high school established for that private school. So it's saying they have to meet the criteria for the
school
private
that
school,
they're already attending.
unless they're already there.
My interpretation is that this applies to them meeting the criteria to our school.
Which would be what?
I think we should clarify that, must
Yeah.
meet the criteria for admission to the district, capital D, probably, high school, where the courses will be taken.
That would make more sense to me.
And that would help resolve the question mark.
Yeah, I mean,
Are you trying to,
I'm assuming they're talking prerequisites.
well,
That's
Yeah.
really what they're talking about. but
Right.
They don't say it.
that's what it sounds like to me.
You have to be able to get into the high school in the area, which isn't difficult at a public school, because we have to educate everybody.
So the criteria, the state statute says, and I'll read it and I'll include punctuation. The school board of a school district operating high school grades shall allow a pupil enrolled in a private school or a pupil enrolled in a tribal school, comma, who has met the standards for admission to high school under sub 1, comma, to take up to 2 courses during the semester. So in looking at this paragraph here, the student must meet the criteria for admission to the high school, comma, there would be information in between the established pieces. So there's, the policy is missing what that is. And so if I go up to, the first section or the first statement in this, it's the school board of a district operating high school grades shall determine the minimum standards for admission to high school. And so what that would mean in Waukesha would be, the completion of 8th grade at a school and then moving forward. For this purposes of this policy in athletics, we may want to add language in there that talks about admissions to the school district of Waukesha schools, because that is what is intended in this.
Yeah.
So, just to be clear, perhaps a statement, student must meet the criteria for admissions to an SDW high school established for the private school.
You want to play with it for next month?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
Because
Proceed.
we're getting into a lot of linguistics and wordsmithing here.
It's a little
Thanks.
funky, you guys gotta smooth it out a little bit.
So we're going to look at that one again. And
Thanks.
now we know what we want to clarify at least. Okay. All right. Wait a minute, I got two different. Okay. This is where we have two policies that we're going to talk about, because we have currently we have two policies that we believe should be combined into one policy. And so we're going to work with 0144.5 and I have to staple it together. 0144.2 to be, that's the first one was board member behavior and code of conduct, and the other one is board member ethics, and we're just folding those two together into one policy, which by the book makes us working on a new policy.
Right.
Which means we will go through the two reading and one board approval subsequently, right? Julie's got her head going, so we're good with that. So if you look at, I thought I had my colored ones with me, here we go. Oh, here we go. So if you look at it, 144.2 is flat out eliminated. And those items are brought forward to 144.5. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Does anybody have an issue with this? And this, again, is just a combination, and we have to vote on them together because we can't have one of them approved and not the other one. So, any questions on this one?
I do,
Kelly?
thank you. The asterisk indicates new material that's added to the policy.
That is of special attention. That it's new to what would be both policies, yes.
So on
Oh,
the,
the additional part?
yep, and that applies to the use of electronic communication devices.
Yep.
Where's my copy of that?
I just want to make sure that we're not like taking my tools away.
No, it really is, during the meeting, being present during the meeting. So if your iPad is your means of accessing the board packet, that's board business. What this is talking about, though, is creating the impression or actually communicating with others outside of the meeting where you're,
Yep.
they're,
Talking to somebody in a different room.
right, somebody in a different room, or, what could be like the worst-case scenarios, the board is in, negotiations over something, and there's information being exchanged in the moment, that want to be prohibitive of that. Mr. McCaffrey last month had some questions about like enforcement pieces, and that is spelled out on the last page, the third page of the policy.
So I think, I'm fine with it. I think it's reasonable and it's appropriate. I do know that we may not be in full control of that, though, so we can put cell phones away, but if we're looking at a tablet and somebody sends something, we just need to dismiss it.
Right.
The-
There's no prohibition against somebody sending you something. I
Yeah.
think prohibition is against replying to it.
Yeah. And exceptions may be made by the board. I would just like some clarification on that, because I think that might be either the board president or the board president or the committee chair. And I'm just making up an example, but let's say someone has a family member who is in the hospital and they're waiting for information about that. They might ask the committee chair or the board president to say, hey, can I keep my cell phone next to me in case there's something urgent that I need to respond to? Again, I'm just making it up, but just saying exceptions may be made by the board kind of implies there's not one person making, who makes the
Sure.
exception?
And
Or are
if-
we taking a vote?
If the committee would like to designate that to the president or the chair, now would be the time for us to make that minor change.
Yeah,
I think it simplifies.
it could happen too. It probably has happened. Okay,
Would president and/or committee chair be,
Maybe just the presiding officer.
okay.
Yeah, president.
I'll add that
officer,
language.
which would be the vice
that
president.
covers it. Okay, so, yes, Anthony?
Just a question on that device. People use their smartphones for all kinds of things. I mean, you may have prepped something to look at. Who knows? I totally appreciate the, replying to stuff. I leave mine on there just in case of emergency, just in case someone would. So it's not a question of having it, it's a question of using it.
Correct.
But in some cases, you may need to use it for board business with a smartphone. Then you would ask the president if that's okay? Is that what the stipulation is there?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, and I can't speak for all of the uses of the smartphone, but the district iPad does provide the functionality of the
Right.
smartphone, and that's the district-issued device for you. So if you're, referencing a news article, if you're referencing a set of data that you want to talk about, and it's up on your iPad, that's the board-issued, that's your device. The smartphone, it could be used without any bad intent. It's just kind of the impression that could be given
Sure.
if that's the thing that's being looked at all the time.
Okay.
And we've always been pretty reasonable about that. We've had people that have, maybe somebody's sick and they're waiting to hear something, and we've allowed, we just
Right.
allow it.
My
You
cell
are
phone
all
doesn't
people
work in
before
here.
you are board members.
My cell phone doesn't work in here anyway, so.
You're the only one.
Okay. With that modification, I would be seeking approval of the two policies, 0144.5 being made the new policy and the other one being deleted, 0144.2.
So moved.
Moved by Patrick, seconded by Anthony. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nope, it's 4-0. Julie. Thank you for that one. And we have a similar situation going on with, these are more, let's see, 2700.01, school performance and accountability reports, and 0174.2, school performance report. That was a one-paragraph policy which says the same thing, and we just don't need to do it in two places, what it really amounts to, so.
Correct.
Oh, and the fact that some of that stuff has become so technology-oriented that we don't have, some of the stuff was able to be modified.
Yeah, we as a district, all of our information is in the Wise Dash public portal,
Right.
and it is linked, it is on our website. So any citizen who wants to see school report cards, and then any of the public information, attendance rates and such that is forward-facing, they can absolutely go to the Wise Dash public portal, look up School District of Waukesha, and you can drill that down to specific schools for the data. It's much more comprehensive than what the old school performance report
Right.
was, and it's all within the click of a button for an individual. You can do comparisons on there between Waukesha and Appleton or another school district if you wanted to. So it's a much more easy tool to use than what the old performance reports were.
Yeah.
This does add the district accountability near the Title I provisions. So you can see that a copy of each school accountability report card as prepared by the DPI shall be reported to the parents of each student enrolled or attending the school. The report shall be sent simultaneously with a notice required in 8146, Notice of Educational Options. So we'll be communicating that out with our families as we have on the options piece.
Questions on this one? Seeing none, I would be entertaining a motion for the 2700.01 being the new policy and the deletion of, gotta find the number, 0174.2.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So with the with the school report cards, I know that there are some private schools that have school report cards because they have students that are using vouchers. Are those included in this policy? You know what I'm talking about?
Are our students included in that policy who go there?
Yes.
Or does the school? Yeah, so.
Yeah,
if
the school, I know, gets a report card based on those students.
Yep, they gather our public school students into their report card.
Okay. And how do we report that out?
That, I believe, all at the end of the year is part of the financial transfer as far as the.
What is?
Like, if you get a voucher and you go, there's the financial transfer at the end of the year.
Okay.
We don't have that, it's a very interesting system, the voucher
right.
system. Like, you don't know who went where, you just know how much money left you at the end of the year.
Okay, so you don't know who's, those students that they're reporting out on that, like, say, CMH has a student report, or, a report card, but it's only based on the students that are vouchered out of our, it's not based on all the students at the school.
That's correct, my understanding.
Okay, so we don't use that data for anything?
No, we're not.
Because there are students, for our students.
Right, it's not, once you go there, you're there. Similarly, a student from, New Berlin or Brookfield could go, and they would be in that
They would
pool
be in that pool
of
of-
public school
Right.
participation at that
Okay.
school. Yep,
And it doesn't.
with school dollars.
It doesn't segregate those, okay,
No, it doesn't come back.
okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay. Again, I'll be seeking approval of these two policies,
So moved.
seconded by Kelly. Thank you. Further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0, Julie. Thank you. Okay, now we have a different bundle for you of, I don't know, it's about 9 of them, or maybe more than that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 of them. But a lot of duplications in here. These are all policies we've received recently from Neola with some modifications. Joe, can you kind of summarize what this whole process is about?
Well, this is not the kind of the legal bundle that we just had, that we pulled from the agenda tonight, just to do some cross-referencing in the system. So these, again, are just a part of the policy update from the July 2021 bundle release. It does cover a wide variety of policies across our system, from employment of substitute teachers and staff to non-discrimination policies on the basis of sex in educational programs. So, we can go through them item by item.
Yes.
And what the changes are as the committee sees fit.
Okay. Policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs or activities, revised. Some of them are just simple.
Yeah, the National Incident-Based Reporting System updated rape and the definition of rape and non-forcible sex offenses. So on page 2 of the policy, you'll see the formal definition of rape, and then a clarification of incest and statutory rape in policy. If you move forward to page 4 in the policy, you will see the Title IX coordinator shall report directly to the superintendent, except when the superintendent is the respondent in such matters. Then the Title IX coordinator would go right to the board president. They highlight third parties, they capitalize third parties throughout the policy.
Right.
And again, that was some language just to provide I guess more of a formal title of that person in the investigation. Again, on page 10, you'll see if the superintendent is the respondent, the Title IX coordinator will notify the board president of recommended remedies for consideration and, if necessary and appropriate, implementing in compliance with applicable due process procedures, whether statutory or contractual. So there are measures then that start to come in on page 10. On page 11 of the policy, nothing herein shall prevent the superintendent from implementing appropriate remedies, and again, this is during the appeal process, excluding disciplinary sanctions while the appeal is pending. So if a person appeals, we would not be implementing the discipline at that time, but we may change job assignments or do something like that with an individual in this case. And I believe that is the end of the updates to this policy.
And these are all given to us by Neola,
These
or
are
somebody.
correct. Neola makes this recommendation, but these are vetted by their attorneys. They are based off of updates, like in this particular policy. Rape is defined differently in the National Incident-Based Reporting System. So based off of those updates, they're saying school district, you may want to consider these, and therefore we're coming forward to the committee for consideration.
Right. Okay, that's 2266. Any questions about this one? Okay, then I would be seeking approval, or excuse me, yes, giving approval for the accepting, these will be read, what's the word on these? Are these read and,
These are approved at committee and then approved on consent agenda if.
these can go that way?
Yes.
Okay.
These are not new policies.
We have so many different ways we can do these things, so this one we can seek approval tonight. Kelly?
Question of clarification, this is all agendized as one action, but we're going to split these out in individual.
Oh, yeah,
So,
I think it's, yes, I think we better.
Yes, please.
Didn't mean it quite that way, it was. Okay, is there a motion for approval of
I would
226?
move to approve policy 2266.
Okay, thank
As
you,
amended.
Kelly. And is there a second? Second. Seconded by Anthony. Any further discussion on 2266? I will accept all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Julie? Okay, thank you. 4162, controlled substance and alcohol policy for employees who are transporting students.
So this talks about when controlled substances tests are to be administered, and if you go on page 2 of the policy, the additional language is in green. There's some clarification after any accident, whenever the district determines an employee may have contributed to an accident involving fatal bodily injury or damage to property, the district may require the employee to be tested for drugs or alcohol or both. In addition, the Department of Transportation regulations require that drivers submit to post-accident testing for drugs and alcohol under the following circumstances: when the driver is involved in an accident involving the loss of human life, regardless of who was at fault, or when the driver is involved in an accident in which he or she is issued a citation for a moving traffic violation and the accident involves an injury to any person, immediately receives medical treatment away from the scene, or involves disabling damage, must be towed away, cannot be driven from the accident scene to any vehicle. So this just clarifies how we would test. It's important to note we don't run our own transportation company. First Student is our transportation carrier, but our high schools have a number of vans that coaches and others use to transport students in the community for activities or to sporting events, so this would be applicable there.
And in that particular page, apparently, there was no description of after any accident previously, huh? This is
Correct.
This is,
Correct, this puts the parameters on it.
okay, also, there is something on the third page.
Correct.
Oh, that's just,
Prior to the beginning of the testing program, the district shall provide training for all employees, including drivers and their supervisors, about A, the dangers and adverse effects of drug and alcohol use, B, the indicators of probable alcohol misuse and controlled substance abuse, item C, board policy 4122, drug-free workplace, and 4161, unrequested leaves of absence and the fitness of duty. The policy on substance abuse and the employee assistance program are deleted in this.
you know,
They're spelled out in the handbook,
separately?
separately in the handbook.
Okay. Okay, that is 4162. Any discussions on that, Kelly?
Just a question, so do we rely on our transportation service provider to handle any kind of random drug testing of drivers?
They handle all of their drivers, pre-screening tests, pre-driver test, and then they have the, I don't want to incorrectly use the term, but reasonable suspicion and stuff like that. They can do any testing.
It's done for us.
They take, the First Student handles all of that, yep.
So where we say the superintendent shall establish a drug and alcohol testing program, et cetera, and then item E includes on a random basis, that responsibility is essentially designated to the contractor in a legal agreement?
That is part of the, First Student processes, but Sharon Thede, as our HR director, has the ability to implement that for district employees pursuant to this policy.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeking no further discussion, as I would be seeking a motion for approval of 4162.
So moved.
Moved by Patrick,
Second.
Seconded by Kelly. Further discussion? Seeing none, I vote for yes. Anybody? I'll say that backwards. Would you please vote yes if you are in favor of accepting this policy? Aye.
Aye.
That's the word I messed up on. Aye, 4-0. Julie? Okay. 7440, video surveillance and electronic monitoring.
Yeah, so this policy, on the bottom of page 1, the board will not place video surveillance electronic monitoring equipment for the purposes of obtaining information for routine appraisal, evaluation, or monitoring. However, video footage captured in the normal course of surveillance which shows information pertinent to staff performance or conduct may be used for that purpose. So just to explain this part of it, we wouldn't be placing cameras unbeknownst to anybody in the classroom to supervise or to gain information for a teacher on their evaluation. But if we did know that somebody's performance was low and they were sitting on the floor drinking a soda in a hallway at a high school for an extended period of time during what would be instructional time, we could grab that footage and use that as part of the evaluation piece. But due to what we learned in the pandemic with virtual teaching, and then also just in how our teachers instruct today, we don't want to not allow videotape or virtual observations of teachers who are teaching in a virtual environment. And so that's what the page 2, on top of page 2, talking about allowing for purposes of staff observation and evaluation, video submissions, and the observation through live streaming of the teacher's performance.
Okay. Questions on 7440.01? Anthony? I was assuming, I guess.
I was going to. So, obviously, there was video going on with virtual, and still is to some extent. That was much more, obviously, in the past year. Would this prevent cameras from going in classrooms in the future? I mean, obviously not secretly, but putting cameras in classrooms, for the purpose of behavioral issues, maybe as a deterrent, watching lessons plans. I mean, it has been brought up by a number of people to have cameras in classrooms. I don't know that that's feasible, but would this prevent that from occurring in the future?
I think this policy and probably just a general overall discussion would have to happen before that was done about video surveillance and the impact that would have. As students start to fall into more and more protected class, such as students with disabilities who have regular behavior, a camera in the classroom for anybody to see would have a substantial impact on that student's rights as a student. We did have to tease that out when we were live streaming classes and give teachers instruction. So should a student with an IEP who has a behavior need, if they were to start having a behavior issue in class, we did have to give teachers instruction on how to divert the camera to give that student the privacy that they needed. So just a general stream from the classroom could cause issue for students who have certain needs, and we'd have to find some way to navigate that if that was the decision the board wanted to make.
Okay.
Okay, anything further? Kelly?
Is there a specific statute that governs the destruction of video after 14 days?
That's they defer to how long your videos are kept in your system. So I think ours is, it automatically renews after 14 days. Otherwise, you'd be adding whatever is needed, hard drive after hard drive or data box after whatever it's called. So you would go through the data. I mean, we have in our hallways, on our parking lots, in our schools, we've got 24/7 the ability to be recording, and if that doesn't flush itself out after 14 days, the server would become bogged down. So I think it's deferred to what is your life on your system.
I certainly understand, it's not an easy conversation when we talk about the idea of cameras in the classroom. There's a lot of things I think it could resolve. We're talking a lot about bullying and harassment and what's actually going on in the classroom. It would never be intended to take away from the teacher's independence and privacy, but obviously there are student privacy related issues that have to be considered, and I think that's an issue that probably rises above the updating of this policy for practical reasons. So I would be comfortable moving forward with these changes, and I think that's a conversation for way in the future.
So do you want to move in favor of this one?
I will, any comments?
No.
Absolutely move to approve policy 7440.01.
Seconded by Patrick.
Second.
Thank you. Further discussions? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Lynn? She used to do that too.
I was gonna say.
Been a long day. Okay, now we're moving to three policies that will be handled, in this case, they can be handled together, Kelly. This is where it's the same policy except it's administration, professional staff, and support staff. And it's conflict of interest again, but this time it's staff.
Yeah, so this does include the same language that you saw earlier around administrative employees must perform their duties in a manner that does not violate criminal conflict of interest laws by having a private pecuniary interest in the amount that exceeds $15,000, but also lesser valued conflicts that nonetheless create an appearance of using one's public position to secure a private pecuniary interest and/or benefit. And then it does get into that substantial value component of it that we talked about earlier as well. You'll see that across all the policies. On the second page of the 1000 series policy, to the extent that the school district has a parent, affiliate, or subsidiary organization that is not a state, local government, or Indian tribe, the school district may not conduct a procurement action involving the parent, affiliate, or subsidiary organization if the school district is unable or appears unable to be impartial. I think that there was a lot of ambiguity in that statement, that it would be very difficult to enforce, so that is now removed.
That's the deleted one.
Policy, that is the deleted component of it.
And that appears in all three of them.
Yep.
Or appeared.
And it's the same change in all policies.
The rest of it is the same. Okay, this was ethics and conflict of interest for administration, professional staff, support staff, three different policies. Kelly?
So I think this again raises the question of, is $15,000 the right number? And then the addition in item B of anything of substantial value is obviously vague. I see that a lot in the healthcare space too. Perhaps anything of, perceived, I think I like the way it's written, conflicts that nonetheless create the appearance of pecuniary interest and or benefit, but anything of substantial value will mean something different for different people.
Apparently. And this, further discussion? Okay, then in this case, we will be voting on all three of them. So I'll be seeking, go ahead.
Yes, and then maybe this was your point, Dr. Piazza.
Yeah.
If we're revisiting that number in that first policy that we discussed pertaining to board, wouldn't we be doing the same for all these, that 15,000? Would we
Yeah.
be revisiting that number as to whether that should be lower or not?
Isn't that why you're,
Well, there's nothing there's no, $15,000 is a legal standard. That's the criminal standard. And so if the committee would like to recommend a number, as Dr. Piasek did earlier, $5,000 or $2,500 or more, then, whatever that number is, that would, I wouldn't have anything to propose to you other than what the legal standard would be. The comment around, anything of substantial value, I think, I think that we'd have to be careful if we wanted to define that any further as well. Again, my perspective on it, if we get beyond the administration, but, if we were to look at like professional employees, if we have, and this could impact teachers, for instance, that, they get done teaching with us in the middle of June, and some of them may go on and paint houses, or somebody may do concrete work and pour driveways, and, if you're using your skill, whatever it might be, and because people knew you as the masonry teacher, or people knew you that you painted, I think you'd want to be very careful as to how you try to do that within the scope of someone's employment. I mean, you wouldn't want somebody soliciting during their work hours, extra work for themselves during the summer, but if somebody said, hey, I know you do this, and would you come and do my driveway, we also wouldn't want to prevent somebody from making income in the summer that way.
Relative to the $15,000, though, if we wanted to change and use a number of $5,000, we can't change the fact that that is the legal. All we can do is encourage people not to go up to that number.
Our policy would say 5,000, and that would be where we would be bound to as employees, if that were the number that you picked.
But then we'd have to add a sentence. We can't just change the number here, because that number is the legal number.
Right, we'd have to be very clear, because there is the criminal, because the sentence does say the criminal conflict of interest laws pursuant by having an interest of 15,000, that exceeds 15,000.
So, and we can't change that.
We'd have to look at what that statement means. There would have to probably be, there would probably have to be another sentence added to the policy that said the school district of Waukesha caps it at 5,000. That's very informative.
That would be our way to handle this. And I would have no problem with that either, but I think we can't just drop the 15 and put 5 in. We have to add a sentence that says
Or remove the criminal component of it.
Yeah.
And not accept the change of the policy that adds the criminal component to it, and just allow the law to be the law.
I understand that would work too.
Yep.
So I think what if I could, I think what
Yes.
we're saying is we're requiring disclosure beyond that amount, right? Because when I think about what's the practical application of changing the number, are we going to make things really hard for a bunch of people? Are there a lot of staff members that have a $5,000 conflict, but not a $15,000 one? And I think at the end of the day, we want to know if people have financial conflicts of interest in how they do their jobs, how we do our jobs as board members. So I do like the language, however, where it says, to a lesser value conflicts that nonetheless create the appearance of using position to secure interest. But again, that's arbitrary. There's not a hard number on that. So the question is, do we create an administrative burden by having disclosures over a certain amount? How frequently are we having people disclosing that they have a financial conflict of interest?
In 8 years, I've not seen, a conflict of interest arise, to the best of my knowledge, where there was a disclosure. I'm trying to remember back, but I don't think we've had any of that, rise up. I don't think anybody's garnering that $15,000, like, keep an eye on it. Most of our full-time staff don't have any extra time to do anything else right now, so.
And I think the intent here is not to stop anybody from having a summer job or, doing something, moonlighting on something, just that it doesn't conflict with what we're doing. So, so the number may be moot in that, it's an uncommon issue, and if a conflict is going to arise, it's going to be substantial or not. But I guess like I said, you just don't want to have people behaving in a way where they're saying, well, I can have a $14,000 interest, but not a $15,000 one, so.
Well,
Yeah, that's always a problem. And how many occurrences can you have?
That's the
Yeah.
benefit
I don't
of
have
the
the-
lower number.
That's another big one.
5,000, 5,000, 5,000.
Or 15,000, 15,000, 15,000. If it's a different occurrence and a different conflict
Yeah.
of interest, and you hit that 14,000, I mean, how many times can you hit that? I haven't heard of any conflict of interest recently. The land sale happened.
Well, do we want to make an adjustment or not?
I mean, I guess what would be an example of a conflict of interest? Like, and I understand what you said, and I think a better example would have been a mechanic, but we're not in the business of mechanics, so if we got a guy that says, hey, I'll change your brakes, and is a tech ed teacher, it's not really a conflict, unless he's doing it on school property. Because we're not a mechanic business. Now, if he's using our tools and bringing our stuff in and using our insurance, that would be a conflict of
That
interest.
wouldn't really be,
But any moonlighting, unless they're using our facilities, would not be a conflict of interest. So
So an example would be, any member, staff, or board member that's diverting business to an operation that they have
They own.
personal interest
That's a
in.
good
And, again, I'm just making it up. A staff member has a spouse who owns a printing company or a merchandise company, and club or certain school is having T-shirts or sweatshirts printed
Right.
there. That's something that. Again, I honestly, I'm just making it up,
No,
but that would be an example
those
to
would be
me
the
where
yeah, right.
you kind of want to know that,
right, and it wouldn't be a moonlighting,
right?
because we're not in the business of any of that. We don't build houses or we don't fix cars, so.
So I suspect changing it to 5,000 would
Yeah.
actually create an increased number of potential disclosures, but we don't have any basis to, and again, my intent's not to create administrative burden, it's really just to be clear that any financial conflicts of interest are something that should be disclosed.
I mean, would it be helpful that if we added another letter in here that said, any, and to grab the language that you're talking about, Dr. Piasek, that, any interest that would exceed $5,000 must be disclosed to the district. I mean, that still allows for the criminal language of $15,000 or more, and then it adds the requirement of disclosure for anything that's $5,000 or more, to your point about the printing press or, somebody who runs a tutoring business, where they're funneling, students because it's the best math tutoring business.
and just running a business doesn't mean it's it. It has to be, the conflict of interest has to be, it's doing something that the district is suffering for.
Yeah.
So,
Or is charging the district,
or charging the.
or is charging
yeah.
the district for certain
Yeah.
services that we'd like to know
So
about.
there has to be a burden on the district
Right.
to be and just having, running around Saturday cutting lawns or painting
Would have
houses
nothing to-
is.
Right, would have nothing to
Has
do with the
nothing to do with
district.
the damage to the district.
Correct.
Right, unless they're using district,
So that's not a
Facilities.
conflict, so.
And I
So
think
you're
the-
really getting to maybe getting people to understand, whether it's 5,000 or whatever, that this is what you're doing to the district, so you better tell us about it. I mean, your words were fine in my mind. That's my opinion.
I think the existence of a potential conflict or an interest outside of the district does not necessarily prohibit
Right.
the activity.
Right.
It's more about the disclosure and the management of it.
Yeah, and if somebody came to, Jim or somebody says, I'm doing this, and it has no impact on the district, that's fine, do it. But if it has an impact on the district, then you've got a conflict. So, do you want to change
We
that?
can look into it. We certainly can hold on it and look into it.
Yeah,
The appropriate.
I like
language.
that sentence you talked about adding, though.
Yeah, I mean, in many instances, reputable firms or people will come forward with any potential ethical or conflict things on the front end of an issue that they're trying to address
Right.
with you, so.
yeah, no, for sure.
But we certainly can look at some appropriate language and bring that back next month.
Okay. Policy 3216 and 4216, staff dress and grooming and support staff dress and grooming.
Yeah, so there's a statement added in the middle. The board authorizes the development of standards for staff dress and grooming that promote a professional educational atmosphere that gives consideration to the impact in the educational process and the diversity of district staff. And then you can see under item A that staff members be physically clean and neat. They struck well-groomed because there's some ambiguity around what well-groomed means. Dress in a manner consistent with professional responsibilities. That allows for the flexibility of the physical education teacher or the technology education teacher. Dress in a manner that communicates to students a pride in personal appearance. Dress in a manner that does not cause damage to district property, and be groomed in such a way that does not disrupt the educational process. It does eliminate hairstyle or dress, because again, we do want to honor the ethnic backgrounds of our staff. And, if we don't want to create people who have to, do something to match an appearance. I mean, you are who you are when you come to work, as long as you look professional in your presentation.
Kelly?
My understanding of the added language is that the board is then authorizing, I assume, the superintendent to develop a staff dress code above and beyond this policy? Is that
If it's necessary, yes, you could do that, yep.
So what does that mean, then, the board authorizes the development of standards?
If it became a situation in the district where there were too many sweatpants, the superintendent could say, we need to get back to professional dress and implement a standard of dress, and again, beyond your job responsibilities.
Okay, I'm going to take a risk here. Maybe just a clarification. I assume that anything related to our controversial topics in the classroom policy would kind of also govern, whether a staff member might wear a certain T-shirt or something like that.
There are certain rules that talk about what somebody wears being within their right to wear it, but then also the captive audience that, must be exposed to it. And so there could be some work done around that particular topic, if the committee would like us to do some investigation on that.
Build that into this one, or are you talking about?
This policy would give us the authority to implement something.
Right.
It certainly could be revisited in the future if the committee would like us to.
Yeah, and at this point, this is just an authorization to do it.
Right.
Right.
Doesn't define it.
Correct.
Okay. So, would you like to take a motion to define this, approve this policy as adjusted here? Because the rest of what you're talking about could come later.
Yep.
I think the policy is giving the authorization to develop at an administrative level.
Okay. So, is there a motion to do so?
So moved.
Patrick moves, seconded by
Second.
Kelly. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting this policy, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0, Julie. And the last, which is 4 policies, again, it's 4 different populations. Employment professional staff, employment substitutes, professional staff, employment support staff, and substitute support staff. And the policy is employment of professional staff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it will be a repeat throughout. And Joe, do you want to take a shot at this one?
Yeah, so this talks about, in the middle of the paragraph, it talks about that the superintendent will establish the terms of employment and the description of job duties for each professional staff member, and that the board has the responsibility to approve all administrators and teachers as required by state law. And that compensation shall be fixed by an established compensation structure or board action, which the board has the salary structure for teachers and administrators, middle management in the district.
This really isn't any different than what we're doing.
Correct, this captures what we're doing in policy. There was a section in there, that the board shall approve the employment and also fix the compensation.
Yeah.
Establish the terms for employment.
Better wording.
Right, this more accurately captures our actual practice. On the second page, there was, and these are just some recommendations, again, for consideration. The board will not employ, but may continue to employ the spouse or child of any board member, and the board will not employ, but may continue to employ the children, siblings, parents, in-laws, or bona fide dependents, IRS criteria of a board member. So this would be something that, you may want to consider in the deliberation tonight.
May I just ask a comment about that? It seems like those sentences are almost redundant. The first one says spouse or child. The second one says children, siblings, parents. Could we just combine them and say?
They all could be lumped together,
Yeah.
into one sentence.
Mm-hmm.
I assume there's no difference between the child referenced in the first sentence and the children referenced in the second sentence.
No, there wouldn't. The second sentence does include the bona fide dependents, which is a more broad,
Yeah, very word.
but we could put all of that in one
I mean,
sentence.
it's minor if it's the only change that we have to address. I don't think it's
And we can combine that in the final draft for next month.
administrative.
Well, so they did present this as two separate items that we could just, if we wanted to take one and not the other.
Sure.
I don't see why, though.
The options that, again, they make these recommendations, and then I meet with the assistant superintendent that corresponds with it and kind of take a look at best guess for practice and then make our recommendations to
Okay.
you guys as a committee for approval. And these were the areas that we took a look at for your consideration. I mean, we've known in the past that there have been board members who have had children who work in the district, but the children were employed in the district prior to the board member's position. But this would be kind of something that would change, in the future practice for all of us.
Okay, yes, Anthony.
To clarify, so if someone's child is a teacher and they become a board member, that's okay. But if someone is on the board or is newly elected to the board and down the road, one of these distinctions wants to become a teacher, that wouldn't be allowed.
Correct.
And what would be the rationale for that if they're qualified?
The rationale would be just in the overall, the things that the board has to vote on as it pertains to teacher, the employee handbooks, benefits discussions, salary discussions, general policies and how those policies would, impact staff, like the prior one on employee dress. So, there's so many policies that a board would pass that would have an impact on an employee that essentially the board member would have to recuse themselves of because they would impact the day-to-day goings for the staff member who was employed. It would be prohibitive. This does not have to be accepted. Again, it's just recommended for discussion tonight.
Yeah, because what we've had in the past, there's always been a situation where they were already here before somebody became a board member. But in those cases, you do have a lot of, situations where the board member has to not participate.
The board member whose child wanted to be a teacher in the school district of Waukesha, if this policy were passed, there would have to be a very, deep family discussion as to, is the employment of the child more important than the seat on the board, or is the seat on the board more important than the employment of the child? That's the personal family discussion that would have to go on.
I appreciate that, but it seems like the policy is preventing someone from becoming that when it already exists. So if you're really only penalizing the person that would want to become a staff member in the future. I could see applying it either way consistently, but I don't know. I guess to me that seems inconsistent, for my opinion. Mm-hmm. I mean, if there's a conflict of a board member, or they would have to feel they had to recuse themselves in some instances when they already had an employee here, The same would be true if they would have a future employee. I don't see the distinction. I wouldn't, if someone becomes a board member, I wouldn't expect to, fire their son or daughter or spouse. That wouldn't be right either if they're already here. But to keep anyone from becoming that's qualified, I think is, I don't think that's consistent. I think that's, you may be losing some good staff too, that,
Well, that's that's a good point, Anthony.
I don't understand.
Because you always could just not hire the person
Right,
without having those two sentences there.
right. And you certainly wouldn't want to fire someone because someone said, hey, I'm running for school board, I win, and, oh, by the way, you're fired because your spouse lost their job. Because I guess I just don't see it's applied equally. I don't see the reason to apply it that way.
So if you're currently an employee, you would never lose your job as a result of a parent, in essence, becoming a school board member. That would not be the issue. It would be if you are not an employee and a parent or spouse is on the board, it would then prevent you from applying for the job, or it would require that not applying for the job, getting the job, or it would require that the board member resign their position on the board. Now, again, these are just suggestions. There's nothing in law that says you must take it. It's just being proposed as something to consider. So if the committee doesn't like it, we can strike it, and then it's not part of what then gets forwarded along next month to the board, and we just take it out tonight.
Just one last point. I could understand this in the context of someone's running for election and at the same time someone's applying for a job. I can see there might be some sway there either way, and you wouldn't want that conflict. But if you're talking a year down the road or two, I don't see the distinction at that point. Once that board member is sitting, why does it matter whether or not someone who is qualified to be here in a staff position not get that position? So that would be my problem with this.
If I could add, I tend to agree. I do agree that we wouldn't want to lose a good teacher because because someone being elected to the board. But I think it has to go both ways. I think if we're able to manage the conflict in an existing situation, we need to be able to manage the conflict in a new situation. And while at face value, my first reaction was, well, that makes sense. It wouldn't be reasonable to bring on family members of board members into staff positions. But again, if we're already addressing those conflicts, I don't think it's going to be usual. I don't think it's going to be frequent. But I think like anything else, we need to be able to manage through conflicts. What's kind of running in my head right now is administrative position. It would be strange to have a superintendent married to a board member. That would be unusual circumstances. But and I think the board has to have some discretion in allowing or disallowing those relationships. And I don't know how we put that to policy, but I think there are some that would be inappropriate, and there are others that, why would we let good educators go? But I do think it has to be fair.
And it just, for perspective, as an administrator who would be hiring, if the son or daughter of a board member is in the candidate pool and it's known, there could be the perception that if that person got the job, that wasn't earned fairly. And then there's the unwritten rule of blood is thicker than water. And where does the allegiance lie when decisions need to be made? And that, is also a consideration for the board as you have to make decisions around compensation, benefits, staff reductions in the future if that's required. All of those things start to come into play when you're needed to act objectively and consider something objectively when there is a blood connection in the system. So I offer that from an administrative perspective.
Absolutely. If I could,
Please.
it does certainly remove any perception of bias or the complexity of having to deal with those kinds of situations. You know, what's occurring to me is we all vote on the tax levy, and we all pay taxes in the district. So, you know, inevitably, some of those decisions are going to flow down, and I think it's our duty to make the best informed decisions we can to support the district. I don't think it would, you know, I can't imagine circumstances where a board member is supporting certain salary increases because of a family member, but, I mean, I would ask in past situations, if there was a conflict such as this, would a board member recuse themselves from the increase, the staff increase?
We have had board members recuse themselves of that, yes. Yep.
We have, yeah.
Okay. So that would be manageable. But I do agree that just that application process and some of the perception of expectations. I mean, obviously, we looked at a number of other policies regarding, you know, anti-harassment and intimidation from board members to staff, and so I would assume that all of those policies apply as well. Could always have a.
So the question on this one, just this first one, is do we want these two sentences in or do we not?
And from an administrative perspective, I can live with it either way. It was just an option for us to bring to you for consideration in
Yeah.
this policy.
We can remove them. I don't have a problem with it.
Well, I think that's what I'm hearing. Removing those.
Yeah.
So if somebody, well, we could, yeah, let's do that. Let's find out how it turns out if we vote against these two. Is there any other thing further in here that we need to talk about?
Well, just to notify you, there's just about like signing the contract within 10 days, file in the office of the superintendent a statement showing the date of expiration of the grade and character of the certificate of license held, or evidence of a timely filed extension of such certification with the Department of Instruction. Holding teachers that hold the appropriate license, permit, or accepted application for extension of certificate for the subject matter and grade level taught shall be considered qualified. So again, we want to make sure that our staff is licensed to the DPI and meets the licensing requirements. So that would be the only one under professional staff, or the only addition under professional staff.
Okay. The situation is such that we aren't going to vote for all five of these there's too much difference. So we'll take these in order. So I would at this point be seeking a motion for 3120, employment of professional staff, as with the deletion of those two sentences on the second page.
So moved.
So moved by Patrick, seconded by Anthony. Further discussion? All in favor of approving 3120 as adjusted, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This is 0-4, well, actually, the motion is adjusted as a 4-0.
Yes.
We did not approve it as it came, but we are approving it as we modified it. Okay, now, 3120.04 deals with employment of substitutes.
Yep, this just clarifies how we're going to pay for a sub in half-day or full-day increments. The board will not employ but may continue to employ, so you see those two sentences in there. Then the third sentence, or the fourth sentence, I'm sorry, which we believe is an important addition, relatives of staff member may be employed by the board, provided the staff member being employed is not placed in a position in which he or she is supervised directly by the relative staff member. That is, from maintaining a quality work staff, I think that's an important piece to have, based off of what was commented before. Eliminating the next two sentences would be something we could do tonight.
Well, it's interesting, because that last sentence basically counters sentence 2 and 3. It says, 2 and 3 say you can't do it. 4 says maybe, unless I'm missing something.
2 and 3 are related to
Correct.
board members, and the final sentence is related to staff members.
Administrators, yep.
Relatives, so relatives of staff members, staff members, I'm sorry, not board members, okay, thank you. What are your opinions on those 4 sentences?
I think we keep the first and fourth and delete the second and third. Because the fourth
Yep.
one has been an issue in the past.
Yeah, you're taking,
I agree.
2 and 3 go away.
2 and 3 go away. So moved.
So moved by Patrick,
Second.
seconded by Anthony. So this would be a motion for accepting 3120.04 with only the first and fourth of the additional sentences being added.
Correct.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Julie, as adjusted again. Okay, that gets us to 4120, which is employment of support staff. And this is a little bit different again.
Yeah, this is just
Yeah, this one
one
just,
sentence.
One sentence.
yep.
I propose that we strike that sentence.
Yeah, okay, you're going to propose it, yeah. Okay. Anything further discussion on this one? Patrick mentioned the deleting of the green sentence there. That's the only one in there.
Just a clarifying question, and I have to go back and, because I can't recall if this was struck from the previous policy as well. The sentence relatives of board members may be employed by the board provided that member does not participate in any way in the discussion.
That is only in this policy,
Okay.
I believe. And if you do reject the change, I'm sorry, it is in the other policy as well.
It was
If you do reject the change of this policy, and I guess we would have to then go back and reconsider 3120, then that line then be maintained in there, because that talks about recusing or
Yes.
not voting, so.
Yeah, I apologize for that. That was an oversight, I think, from the previous policy. So we can go back to it. But,
Wait,
yeah.
Finish this one up and go back.
Kelly, you were saying on 4120, the red line, right?
Yep. We would return that to,
It is different than the green line. This is relatives of staff members, relatives of board members may be employed by the board. This is relatives of staff members may be employed by the board.
No, this is,
So we would have to reinstate the red line in order to set the stage for recusing by board members on voting for related said employment. Is why would we reinstate that?
so we want to keep the red and then toss the green.
Yep,
and you,
Which green on it, what are you taking off?
The board will not
the only
employ.
one.
and just for the ease of the discussion, the committee could reject the change, the proposed
Sure.
change to 4120,
Right, and keep it.
because the red line would go back and the green would not be
Okay.
into the policy, because this is in draft.
Putting the red line back on.
Yep,
Yeah, we would reject the change. Would
So that's okay.
Same.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're going to reject the changes.
Yes. So I move to reject the change.
To 4120. That would be both changes, really, right?
Yeah. Change
Okay.
to The policy would be rejected.
Seconded by,
I'll second.
okay, Anthony? Further discussion? Seeing none, we are not going to accept
The change.
the changes.
Correct.
So this would be all in favor would be,
Would be nice.
we don't want, you want a 0 for aye. All in favor of against? 4.
All in favor for not accepting the changes would be an aye vote.
Aye. Okay,
Aye.
we can do it that way, too.
Yes. So because my motion is not to accept the changes.
Your motion is to not accept the changes. All in favor of not accepting the changes, please say aye.
Aye.
4-0. Boy, this is complicated. especially at this time of the night, right? Okay, we should have one more.
So, Mr. Baumgart, if I could, I would like to move to reconsider the decision that we just took on policy 3120.
3120 point,
Gotcha. There it is.
which one, 3120 or 31?
3120.
3120.
Oh, that's on the next page. And what did you want to do, add those back in?
We would, I would assume we would have to rescind our vote, because we would have to reject the changes.
Right, I think Dr.
Correct.
Piasek's motion needs the second to reconsider.
Just-
Okay.
A second to reconsider
Before we,
3120.04.
3120.
No, I'm sorry, 3120. Okay, we have a motion to reconsider 3120. All in favor, please say aye.
I'll second that motion.
Oh, you second.
Yeah.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 And that's 4-0 to reconsider.
Yep.
Good luck, Julie, keeping track of this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do I make the movement to
now what would you like to do on that one?
reject the change?
So we were going to move to approve 3120, but reject the red line at the bottom of page 1, and reject the addition at the top of page 2.
Okay, so the bottom line on page 1 will become good.
Yes.
And what was the other one?
The addition at the top of page 2, the 2 sentences.
Just the 2 sentences on the top.
Correct.
Well, they're already, they haven't been deleted, were they?
We're starting over. We're
We're starting over on
reconsidering.
this one.
Oh, these, you don't mean the top 2, you mean the 2 green ones?
Yes,
Okay,
because we can't reject the changes on this one because there's other changes.
Yep.
There's other changes besides these two.
right.
So we can't just wholesale reject the changes.
No,
Right.
so we're going to do a revision of this policy completely because we're reconsidering it.
Yes.
So we're going to accept it with this change and the other change on page 2.
Correct.
Do we have a motion?
Yep, I got it.
That's my motion.
Second.
Motion seconded, okay. Further discussion on 3120 as changed. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 4-0. Okay. And 4120.04, employment of substitutes.
So again, this does have the names of potential substitute personnel and the positions in which they may substitute shall be maintained in the Human Resource Office. So this is just a roster of subs. It does have those 2 lines that the committee deleted from the last policies. If those are rejected in this vote, we would want to add back in the second line that is red line there. Relatives of board members may be employed by the board, provided a member of the board does not participate in any way in the discussion or vote on the employment when conflict of interest is involved. So we would want to add that back in.
Okay. Oh,
I can make the motion.
okay. Go ahead.
I move to, I'm just going to read them. Reject the change, the board will not employ, but may continue to employ the spouse or child of any board member. Also reject that the board will not employ, but may continue to employ the children, siblings, spouse, parents, in-laws, or bona fide dependents, IRS criteria of a board member. And I would also like to reject the change that relative board members may be employed by the board, provided a member of the board does not participate in a way, discussion, or vote on the employment when conflict of interest is involved. So those changes I do not want.
The second change, the third change go away.
Yep.
And you're bringing back the second red one.
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
Are we clear? You second that?
Second.
Okay. So the motion is 4120.04. We will accept it as adjusted to delete, I'm not going to read them back, those two lines, and add in this fifth line.
Yes.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye, 4-0. Julie, got it? Bless you for that. Okay, believe it or not, that includes, yes, that includes all of our policies for this evening. We did have a request from, actually came from Greg, who unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight, to begin a process where we are understanding more about what the bullying situation is, how we're dealing with it. I'm not sure how much else to describe it. I mean, it's kind of an open conversation on the situation. It's come up, obviously, at the last board meeting is more significant than we had maybe previously thought. Whether that's accurate or not, I'm not sure. But it's there, so.
So, yeah, I guess, based off of the request to discuss bullying, I mean, there's many facets that we could talk about, what we're doing from a prevention standpoint, how many referrals or completed incidences we're actually seeing for bullying, how we would discipline for bullying. I guess, where's the committee at, and what would the committee like to know? And I don't mean this in any way to be snarky, but we have provided multiple updates in written and presentation format on our social and emotional learning curriculum, elementary guidance, our mental health frameworks that we have in the district, the other supports that we have in place. We've talked about student discipline. So I'm happy to entertain any questions or, perhaps develop a presentation for the future that could go to like teaching and learning to talk about bullying. But
Let me ask one, maybe really basic, because the word bullying is being used a lot. Is there a clean definition of what bullying is? Or is there some confusion about what might be considered a bullying incident?
So we have a board policy, and then we have procedures to identify if a claim is bullying or not. We have the policy and we have administrative guidelines that attach to the policy. The policy aligns to what the Department of Public Instruction asked us to put into policy in years past. The guidelines give us a framework to investigate claims of bullying. And then we have created a template that administrators must use when investigating bullying so that they check all of the appropriate boxes. They interview people, they gather enough information, they seek the impact that the person who's reporting bullying is, what they're experiencing. So it's a very detailed process. Luke Pinion, twice a year, every year, does a discipline norming with our principals. This is generally near the top and one of the most discussed issues that we have at that. So we do a thorough job from a policy standpoint all the way to the investigation and determination if it's bullying or not.
So the answer is, it is much better defined than maybe some people have thought. The question is, though, beyond that, we might be hearing about bullying that doesn't necessarily fit those parameters. Is that possible?
I'm not, as I say this, please know that I'm not dismissing any individual's claim that they've been bullied, but it is a term that's been used more and more frequently over the years. I started in education 20 years ago. Bullying was hardly addressed in the scope, formally 20 years ago in schools. The state, due to a number of incidences across the state and the country, put an anti-bullying. They had a requirement, I think it goes back to 2010, that every school district will have an anti-bullying policy and do preventative work in the system. We have that policy on the books, and we do investigate it. So there are claims of bullying. We will get phone calls from parents, say Mr. Baumgart and I are out on the playground and Mr. Baumgart pushes me once and my mom gets upset about it. She will call the school and say, Mr. Baumgart is bullying me. Our principals will investigate it as such, but some instances are determined not to be bullying. It was a negative peer, interaction. It was inappropriate student behavior. It was perhaps physical aggression. But that one incident didn't contribute to a bullying situation for a student. Now, there could be other situations, perhaps where it's repeated, or perhaps where it's severe, where that could happen. A tied to bullying is harassment and discrimination, and we have policies and procedures associated with investigating harassment and discrimination based off of protected class. Sharon Thede and I are the district compliance officers. We get notified anytime a harassment or discrimination complaint gets brought in, and we assist in the investigation of those in our district. That is something that we've worked closely with legal counsel on to make sure that we're fitting the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights components and requirements around that. So we have a very thorough process to address those complaints as well in the system. I think it's important to note that as of this meeting, we have approximately 3,000 office discipline referral incidents that have been cleared in our system. Last week, when Mr. Baumgart and I met to review this agenda, I think it was on Friday afternoon, it was about 2850, and there were 28 closed-out cases of bullying in the district. So 1% of the referrals that we've had come in this year reported, student reports to teachers or administrators that they've been bullied have resulted in a bullying. So it's 1% of the total number of office discipline referrals. Now, we have a number of cases, many, many more, of, physical aggression. Those have, been recorded as well. We have the inappropriate behavior ones, which, have many more referrals. It's not that, we don't have other incidences that have been investigated, discipline's been issued for kids, but again, through the bullying investigation, it has not resulted in a bullying finding.
Go ahead.
I guess the question I have is, have we had an increase in investigations of bullying? Because, as the students talk to us, they're telling us at the board meetings that there's an increase in bullying. I was just wondering if there's an increase in the investigations, there's an increase in reports.
There's been no noted increase in reports across the system. At the board meeting last week, I did mention that there was one school that had abnormally high numbers. I went and met with the principal, and we looked at what was in those office discipline referrals, and based off of what was written, there was no investigation done. There's work to go back and reinvestigate those and determine if there was bullying done. But there was, a cleared case that said bullying, but it was that type of situation that I mentioned with Mr. Baumgart and me on the playground. We need to know if there's more there or not than was it a physical aggression or was it bullying?
Okay.
And that was isolated to one school.
Yeah.
Oh, Anthony.
Question. In our actual policies relating to these topics, it says that they will not be tolerated. I guess maybe some clarification. The phrase zero tolerance has been used. Some say that's in effect, some say that's not. The policies say it won't be tolerated. What does that look like, writing zero tolerance into, my perspective on that is it's a question of enforcing, but what does that mean? What does that look like for a potential policy discussion?
Zero tolerance policies can result in anything from, if it happens, it automatically equals 5-day suspension from school. If it happens, it automatically equals expulsion from school. When you think about the practical implications of that, one time a student bullies, that could result in an expulsion.
Right.
What we know about zero tolerance policies in schools is they have an adverse effect on student populations, particularly marginalized students. So, I would not in good conscience recommend zero tolerance. If there's something that what we need to do in and around, school culture work that exists, what is the climate in the hallways? How are students treating and talking to each other? That I think is fair work for us to do. We have some schools that have taken the PBIS approach, the positive behavior interventions and supports, and developed a real comprehensive tier 1 program around that. And, it has benefit in school. From a practice standpoint, we need to know when these things are happening, and if it's not being reported, what what needs to happen is that if a student goes to a trusted adult and says, I've been bullied, the trusted adult then ensures that that gets reported to the office so that the administration can investigate it. If the student doesn't feel comfortable going there themselves, the adult can act as the bridge in that circumstance. But yeah, from a policy standpoint, we don't tolerate bullying, we do not tolerate harassment, we do not tolerate discrimination. We will use, and I mentioned this at the board meeting last week, a range of discipline, anywhere from the corrective conversations and the facilitated restorative practices that, could help mend a relationship if the perpetrator truly didn't know that they were bullying the other person, all the way to expulsion, pre-expulsion, where the student would be recommended for, dismissal from our system altogether.
Just to follow up to that, how many cases relating only to bullying in the past, year or two have risen to the level of some type of suspension or even an expulsion?
I would say the vast majority of them, I can't give you the exact number, result in a level of suspension, either in school or out of school suspension. We do have the pre-expulsion process, and we have had situations of bullying in the last 2 years that have resulted in pre-expulsions. That generally acts as a step before we would recommend somebody for expulsion, which is why we go through and do the process. We meet with the family, we meet with the student, we hear from the school staff about what happened, and we weigh the case, and if it's something worthy going forward to the board, we'd bring it to the board in the instance of bullying. Generally, what we're seeing, though, is that those types of things trigger to a level of harassment, and the board has entertained those in the past for expulsion purposes.
Just one last thing. What do we have a zero tolerance policy on? What offense would rise to the level of either immediate?
Firearm on the school grounds is an automatic to the board. There's
expulsion or suspension?
That would go right to the board for expulsion of firearm. Substantial drugs, I think with the intent to deliver, I think that would go straight to the board. Substantial battery would go straight to the board. I'd have to go in there and specifically look at what those criteria are. It's slipping my mind right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good questions. Kelly.
Thank you. Some of the dashboards that we have access to are very helpful, and I've looked at these numbers a lot over the last couple months, and I can't make a lot of sense out of, what we're reporting and what we're hearing. I think there's, for me, some inconsistency, just to kind of put in perspective, and it's really difficult, probably inappropriate to try to compare to last year, right? We didn't always have all the kids in the classroom, and I'm, saying that some of these numbers are large compared to last year, so we should probably understand what that is. But what I noticed was, we heard from a lot of high school students, but the high school is where actually the lowest reported incidents of bullying and harassment are occurring. In fact, I think there's one bullying incident that's reported at the high school level. I see a large number at the middle school level, but most of these incidents are at the elementary school level. And so I think it's important that we maybe separate the circumstances. I know this kind of precipitated from conversations about signage and identity groups. Unfortunately, I don't know that there's enough information that we have in terms of the reports to rely on. Well, the numbers tell us there's no more. That doesn't mean it's not an issue. So I don't know how to reconcile what we're hearing on the high school, at the high school level, and I think also maybe at the middle school level to some degree, with what's actually showing up in terms of what's reported.
Yep. I would encourage any student who is experiencing bullying to report that to their administration and make sure that is reported. If that does not happen, we don't get down to the bottom of what the individual bullying situation is. We also don't know the level of the problem that exists in the system. I think more broadly speaking, though, and just in talking to our principals and walking through the schools and hearing our teachers talk and listening to the student groups that we've talked about, this year, more than ever, but not that it is anything new, there is generally a negative tone that is existing, in the system, across society, in social media. You pick it, and so goes the direction of the adults, the children will follow. And, if we are to truly, if we want to get to the bottom of what's going on with bullying, harassment, just the general tone, I think we as adults in all spheres have to take a long look in the mirror. We may not agree with everything that's brought forward, but how we respond and how we disagree, I think is having a substantial impact on how our kids are performing. It's every other day or so, I'm getting a phone call from a principal who just got cussed out by a parent on the phone because their child did something wrong in school. It is profane to the level that we will be notifying the police that that's happening. And the comments that the kids are making to the principal are very indicative of what's being said at home. My mom or dad thinks you're a fill in the blank. And so that if the adults are going to act like that all the way down to the elementary level, when we start talking about bullying and the general tone, that we don't have the ability to control everything. We can respond, and we will respond. And we can put in a social and emotional framework to help with this. We can have our elementary guidance counselors work with our elementary schools. We can facilitate groups across the system. We can facilitate peer mediation. We can do any number of things to help, but the problem has already been prevented if we don't get a better handle on this more broadly in society. We get very brave and we go very quickly when we start entertaining things on social media, when we start to address each other, when we interact. I mean, I can see it, probably guilty of it myself. And we need to take a good hard look as to how we act as adults before we expect the kids to change their behavior. I believe that wholeheartedly. I have been doing this for 20 years. I've seen an increase in it. It has generally been in and around the time of election cycles, where you start to see more heated dialogue and debate in schools. The kids are bringing what they're hearing at home to the school environment. We addressed that back in 2016. It is certainly something that's residual there right now. We have to be very careful as adults. The kids are listening, they're watching us, and I don't believe we're going to make any movement on this wholeheartedly across the system to actually have meaningful change until the adults truly look and act differently. And if we want to get down to the heart of it, I think that that's the issue that we're facing. We have good policies, we have good procedures. Our administrators know how to implement those in the system. We've got excellent student services staff. We have on-site licensed psychotherapists. We have partnered with experts across the state, and we're being recognized across the state for the work we're doing in social and emotional learning, trauma-informed care, mental health. We are doing a lot. And if the problem still exists, then I think we, again, as adults, have to reflect a little bit more on our actions and our behavior and what our children are hearing us say, because that's the impact that we see. We have to balance our rights versus our responsibilities always, because the children are watching us.
You have something else?
Well said, thank you. As I'm listening, just maybe to reflect as a parent in an experience that we've had where a child, a teacher referred a bullying situation to the office that our child was the victim of. We received that communication. We're grateful for how it was handled. I doubt that our child would have reported that bullying if the teacher hadn't actually seen what happened. I suspect that happens a lot.
Probably.
That right?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's seen, if it's noticed, if it's egregious enough that it's escalated, but if it's not, and I think more often than not, it's not. So, what we can't measure is what's actually happening in the hallway sight unseen. And I think obviously it emulates the behaviors that kids are seeing at home and that adults are perpetuating on social media, but we don't have a dashboard. We don't have metrics that tell us what's actually going on in the hallways, and that's I think what we're hearing right now.
And that, I would never doubt the experience that a child has in the hallways. I agree with you wholeheartedly. When we do hear about bullying, generally it is late in the game. The kid has experienced it for a while. It's been face-to-face in school, or it's existed a long time in social media. And when it manifests in school, we're generally dealing with somebody who's been, very hurt by it, and there's an issue there. But the sooner we know about those things, and again, the relationship that our students have with staff, the connection that they can make through, at the high school level. We've heard people come forward and advocate. When they hear that, they need to make sure that that gets to the office, because the principals know what the expectation is. They know that they must investigate it, they must intervene, they must help get things going in the proper direction for the kid who was bullied, and then address the bully in the situation. But if it's not known, like Dr. Piasek, like you said, there's very little we can do to intervene.
Yeah, and the stairways and the hallways are wide open for that.
We have cameras all over our school
Yeah.
in most environments, and if there's something that's going on in the hallway where a kid has been encountered, if there's been a comment made and you don't know the name, generally speaking, we've captured it on camera in the hallway, in the cafeteria area, in the gymnasium. It is definitely worth reporting in all environments.
Yeah. Kelly?
Maybe just a follow-up question. What are the circumstances under which hallway, cafeteria, library, et cetera, video would be reviewed if somebody made a complaint of bullying?
Anytime.
Okay.
Anytime. If Dr. Piasek, if you were bullied outside the girls' bathroom by the auditorium at West High School and you didn't know who did it, we have the camera there and available to take a look at it. You just have to give us an approximate time and we can go back within the scope of that day and pick it out.
And our assumption is that in the classroom, the teachers would have eyes on that situation.
The teachers have eyes on it. We do get a lot of reports from teachers. We get a lot of office discipline referrals from teachers for misbehavior in the classroom. But again, one of the areas that's very difficult for us to patrol and even make a connection to is what happens on social media. If it doesn't have a nexus to school, we don't have the ability to discipline in it unless that child is, the follow-up behavior is happening in school. So again, that's social media. The minute the kids get on a cell phone, you've got access to the entire world. And, I learned a couple of years ago, the multiple social media accounts that kids use, the one that their parents see, and then the one that's hidden from their parents through some sort of app on the phone that the kids are using privately. I commend anybody who comes forward and reports this or threatening behavior. We've been very fortunate, the threatening behavior that's been brought forward, we've been able to investigate that immediately, activate the police, and help us address the situation. So, we have a lot of processes that can help us address things when they come in, but we have to know about them.
Yeah. Anthony?
Just, you had mentioned awareness and stuff and behavior. How often does that, call it training for not only staff, but how often is that revisited with the kids? This is what's expected of students at all grade levels. How many times a year or month or week does that message get out there?
We begin the year at the elementary level, the PBIS type structure, the teaching of expected behavior at the elementary school, it's ongoing, all year long. The middle schools get a little bit more targeted into what the safety issues are. For instance, internet safety, acceptable use, that's been something where we've actually had the police come in and assist us in the training of that with kids and parents. We have our advisory periods where we build in our social and emotional expectations. I believe at the secondary level, we probably could revisit those things more frequently. Generally, we wait until there's an issue presenting itself. You saw the memo we sent out about those TikTok challenges. Yeah. The vandalism to the school triggered a district-wide letter and an expectation that people review. So that is something we can increase, but those things are not addressed once at the beginning of the year and then just left for the remainder of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's a good start. We'll probably be carrying this item on our agenda.
Yeah, and I'd ask as we talk about bullying, I'd ask that you please understand it in the full scope of how we try to address it. So when Luke Pinion presents at Teaching and Learning or sends a board update on a Friday about our SEL work or our mental health program or the work of our psych social workers and counselors, and please know that connects to prevention of bullying. That is the front end. That's what we're doing in many instances to try to prevent that. When you get discipline updates from us, understand that reflects what we're doing after it happens. Because, that means that it's been reported and that's what we've done, the steps that we've taken to address it. That touches on the full range. The policy in and of itself is a good policy, but in practice, I don't think a policy is actually going to prevent everybody from doing anything. They have to believe what's in the policy, and they have to adjust their actions accordingly. And sometimes that results in discipline. A lot of times it results in us doing a good job of teaching on the front end.
Joel, yeah, if we want to keep this on the sheets for a couple more meetings, should we be asking specific questions? I mean, we've asked a handful of them already, but what would you like us to tell you, or us being the board members?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to entertain any questions. If you don't think of them tonight, you can certainly email them to me. We can maintain this as a policy committee agenda item, and I'm happy to report out to you on a monthly basis as to what we're doing around it. I may take your questions and present, the pertinent information as I see it. And if you have more questions, we can come back to it. It is something, one of the students at one of our high schools commented, it's never been good. It just feels worse now. And so, meaning their experience in the system was never really good around bullying or comments or whatever it might be, but it just feels worse this year. And so we can talk about that more in the scope of what's been reported and even just the general feeling. We're going to be doing the YRBS survey that's going on right now. We'll get that information.
What is that?
Youth Risk Behavior Survey.
Okay.
We'll get that information coming back to us in a few months. We can look at that from, this year, but also the historical presentation. Luke Pinion will be doing an update at the Teaching and Learning Committee on that. Elementary level is going to be doing the Hope and Wellness survey that's reflected in the performance indicators. That survey will be going out in December to students. So, you'll see that reported out at Teaching and Learning, how are kids feeling in the school environment overall. That, again, connects to how am I doing at school, and is bullying there and present? Do I feel like I have a trusted staff member? Do I feel welcomed at school? You'll see that information and know that all centers around bullying. I mean, bullying is a component of it, but it doesn't just sit in isolation. I was an administrator in a district when the bullying policy was just presented, and one board member on principle voted against the anti-bullying policy at that time. It wasn't this district, I assure you. Simply based off of the fact that no policy will address people's behavior. It's what do you believe and how do you want to act on a day-to-day basis, and the bullying policy was just a box to check. Now, we have a good policy. We've got good procedures to support that policy, but I want you to understand that bullying goes beyond the policy that you see in the 5,000 series.
Okay.
I'd like to comment, but I don't want to take anybody else.
Go ahead.
So I think what I'm hearing is we are not at a loss for policy, procedure, metrics, or systems related to bullying and harassment. And with that, I don't know if this is a policy committee topic. I think those report outs that are going to teaching and learning, the KPIs around culture are things that we want to be watching. I do think it's important that students understand that there may be ways to escalate situations that they think an adult hasn't seen. So I think the issue of video and, what can be done to kind of bring attention to some of those situations, that's not all is lost when you're inside the school building. I know a lot of this happens outside of the district, and cyberbullying is a real thing, and that may, to some degree, while it's outside of our walls, it's interactions between students that will ultimately manifest here at some point. But I don't know what the expectation was in terms of having the conversation here at policy. I think this has been helpful. I've reviewed the policies related to the circumstances. And again, I don't think we're saying that we have a systematic, that's the wrong word, we don't have an operational problem. What we have remains this cultural problem, and we need to address that in a different way. And I think that's probably not here in the policy committee.
That's possibly right. I don't think I'll erase it, but just going forward to see where else we should be having it going on.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want to kick the can, but those report outs are actually happening at the TNL committee level.
Yeah, I'm happy to agendize it at TNL. I mean, we have the ability to do that and provide updates to the Teaching and Learning Committee.
Okay.
And stick to policy here. Now, if there's a question on the bullying policy, the
Yeah.
the pupil non-discrimination policy, the student anti-harassment policy. I'm certainly happy to discuss those as a discussion item at committee in the months ahead. But, they are right there on the website if you wanted to peruse them on your own. They are very comprehensive. There are associated administrative guidelines with each of those that talk about how we would go about investigating things and who does what and when they do it and by what time they must do it. Title IX is also a policy that stands alone now from discrimination, and that might be something that everybody would want to take a look at too, the Title IX discrimination on the basis of sex, because of the recent and ongoing changes to that policy. It's been to the committee a couple of times.
Well, I'm just going to leave it on there, but maybe we won't talk about it if we can get, because I think you're right. We need to deal with the policies. T&L or somebody has to deal with the kids' behaviors more than we do. That's not really our role. I understand what you're getting at there.
Well, and I think this question of zero tolerance, is there a zero tolerance policy? As our policies are written, there's no tolerance for bullying and harassment. The
Yes.
implementation of that, I understand there are circumstances that, may come into consideration. I think we have to trust our administrators in some cases, in all cases. But I'm sensing that this is something that's happening outside of, what ultimately is being reported.
Yeah. Okay. With that, other than if you have recommendation for future meeting or anything other, if you have anything like that, give it to me now, because otherwise, I'm going to say adjourned. Okay. And we are.